just to respond to Ron, he continues to lie about my record, but I have been a conservative fighter all my life.
We're marching towards fascism under Biden. The only person more fascist than the Biden regime now is Nikki Haley.
I've got these three guys who are all seemingly to compete with, Voldemort. He who shall not be named.
Don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. This is a smart, accomplished woman, and you should stop insulting her.
Excuse me, Chris, I'm speaking. You can put lipstick on a Dick Cheney. It is still a fascist neocon. People need to know Nikki is corrupt. This is a woman who will send your kids to die.
Republican presidential candidates sparred over conservative values, border security, and government spending. I'm Mychael Schnell. Thanks for sticking around for the Hill's post-debate show. A smaller stage tonight, but the stakes were even higher for those four Republican presidential candidates. Each of them needed to have a breakout moment to slow the momentum of former President Donald Trump, if they want to give voters an alternative choice. And here's why. We're only 40 days away from the Iowa caucuses. 8 days later is the New Hampshire primary. And then it's on to Nevada for the Republican caucus. And then the South Carolina primary. Trump remains the first choice among GOP voters with 60% in our recent Decision Desk HQ poll. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are in a battle for second place. Now, there's a lot to discuss, and over the next 30 minutes, Julia Manchester is in the spin room at the University of Alabama, and we'll check in with her momentarily. But in the meantime, we want to bring in Democratic strategist Ameshia Cross and Republican strategist T.W. Arrighi. T.W., the spotlight was on your party tonight. In your opinion, who was the winner and who was the loser?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me on tonight. And I want to start out by saying the first takeaway is that I think this was actually the best questions of any of the debates. And I think Megyn Kelly started off very strong with her first three. My second takeaway is that while there were some viral moments, most coming from Vivek and Christie, who needed them badly, I don't particularly think the overall status of the race has changed. You asked who I think the winner is. I think the winner is Ron DeSantis. However, I think going into it, it's clear that the leader of that pack was Nikki Haley, given how much she was attacked. But I think net, at the end of the day, tomorrow or a week from now, whenever we get the first polls, it'll still be the same. Donald Trump is in the lead. Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are trying to fight for second place. In the other two, Vivek and Christie, both of whom tipped their hand as to who their second pick is on that stage. They're going to have to find their way forward. Vivek trying to find that viral moment to keep his campaign alive. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. And Christie, valiant effort. I think it was his best performance, but I don't really think it changes the calculus for him. Maybe a little bump in New Hampshire, but not much more.
And Ameshia, I want to get your take to winners and losers in tonight's debate.
The biggest winner was NewsNation. I thought that was one of the strongest debates that we've seen of the GOP primary season thus far. But in regards to those on the stage, Nikki Haley, hands down, she came in strong. She's come in strong in previous debates as well. She was the one getting attacked from all sides to a point where Christie even felt like he had to jump in and at least stop some of the barbs that were coming from Vivek Ramaswamy. The biggest loser on that stage would obviously be Vivek. And I think that the person who gained the most, not necessarily the winner, but the person who gained the most would be Ron DeSantis. In the previous debates, he kind of lost his footing. I think that he was a little bit stronger in this one, definitely stronger than he was in the great red state, blue state debate. And at this point, I think that he knows that this is a last-ditch effort. We're down to the wire, as you stated in calendaring out where they are in the primaries and the caucuses. He knows what he has to do, specifically because Nikki Haley has gotten many of his donors at this point, and she's also drawing momentum that I don't think is going to stop anytime too soon.
So sticking with Nikki Haley here, as you mentioned, as both of you mentioned, going into this, the expectation was that Haley was going to take a lot of the shrapnel in tonight's event, just being that she's surging in the polls and she's done well in the previous debates. That, as we saw, ended up happening on the debate stage. I want to play some of those clips of those attacks Nikki Haley was playing. We'll talk about it on the other side.
It is going to take a leader from the outside with fresh legs from the next generation to unite this country. Not the broken politicians who are puppets of the puppet masters. The only person more fascist than the Biden regime now is Nikki Haley, who thinks the government should identify every one of those individuals with an ID. That is not freedom. That is fascism. And she should come nowhere near the levers of power, let alone the White House.
I never said government should go and require anyone's
That's
name.
false.
She said, I want your name.
She
As President of the
absolutely said
United
it.
States, her first day in office, she said, one of the first things I'm going to do,
I said
all
we were going to
social
get
media
the
is, I
millions
want
of
your name.
bots.
She wants
That's what she
government
said.
ID to dox every American.
That's what she said. You can roll the tape.
They're both hitting you on it.
I would be happy to, and I love all the attention, fellas. Thank you for that.
I mean, right there with the I love all the attention, she knows what's happening on stage, right? She knows that these other candidates see her as a threat as she rises in the polls and does well in these debates. So I want to ask you guys, how do you think that she performed tonight? And the way that Nikki Haley took those attacks on stage tonight, I mean, would you agree that this means that the other candidates see her as a threat and see her rising as that potential Trump alternative? TW, we'll go to you first.
Oh, without question. I spoke to her team. I spoke to Vivek's team. I spoke to Christie's team leading up to the debate, during the debate, and after. That was always going to be the case. Everyone knew that. And it's tough to get that big of a barrage from all sides. And, you know, it's one thing to be Donald Trump and to have your bravado and just smack it around and insult. That's not her brand. She stuck to her brand of being a competent leader who understands the issues. And it's tough when you're going up against a sitting governor, and Vivek, who is thirsting for that viral moment to catapult his campaign and keep him relevant and keep the dollars flowing in. Christie, as you noted, did jump to her defense. I don't particularly think she needed it, but I think that was more of him tipping his hand to his donor set. And I'm actually interested to see where Christie goes in these next couple weeks. But I think she weathered it. I don't believe she broke through and made tons of ground, but the fact that she did weather it, like Ron DeSantis weathered a lot of the attacks in the other debates, I think that's actually a massive win. And the only reason I kind of echo Ameshia that the most ground made up was by Ron DeSantis. I think Nikki Haley is in a very close second because I think she weathered it. She was quick with the quips. I think Vivek tried as hard as he could to make a dent, and may have ended up being a self-inflicted indent at the end of the day, but we'll see what the polls show. He's a smart guy. He has a bright future in the party, but this Trumpian bravado he sees as the crudgel to his intellect and youth. I don't know if it's going to play as well as the voters have it play to them with Trump.
Amisha, I want to ask you one more question about Nikki Haley, and then we'll move on to our next topic. But there was at one point where Vivek Ramaswamy went on a long-winded speech attacking Nikki Haley, and she was asked, do you want to respond? And she said, no, it's not worth my time. I mean, did we see a less aggressive Nikki Haley tonight? Was that purposeful, or do you think that it was just in that moment there was too much to go through and she just felt that, you know, maybe better to move on than to sort of go down that rabbit hole?
I think it was absolutely purposeful. And I say that for a couple reasons. One, Nikki Haley is a strategist, and a very good one at that. She was speaking towards a guy who literally had been throwing barbs at her all night long, basically talking about how she didn't know where certain provinces are, that his 3-year-old could be able to figure out on a map where they are more than her, diminishing her roles, diminishing her leadership, and basically trying to strip her down to nothingness. And she responded in that way because she was not going to go down in the gutter with him. And because throughout the debate and the previous ones, she has more than proven herself as one of the most competent, if not the most competent person on that stage. She did not need to fight with Vivek because Vivek was already up there fighting for his own life as the person with the least political experience, the least policy experience, and the one who is trying to trend on Twitter and possibly get a cable news deal more than he was or is trying to run for president.
The next topic I want to get to is former President Trump. He was obviously not on the debate stage tonight. The moderators noting that he was invited to join the debate stage. Even though Trump wasn't on stage, he was still a key focus of this debate, having a whole section of questions. And at one point, we saw Christie and Ron DeSantis go after each other, essentially Christie saying that former President Trump should not be president again. Ron DeSantis not exactly saying if he thinks that Trump is unfit to be office. I think we have a little of that exchange, or at least the part when they were talking about Trump. We'll talk about that for a second.
And have the guts to show up and stand here. He's the one who, as you just put it, is way ahead in the polls. And yet I've got these three guys who are all seemingly to compete with, Voldemort, he who shall not be named. They don't want to talk about it.
So we've got Christie going against Trump pretty hard, which has sort of been his MO this whole campaign. DeSantis, though, stopping short of saying that he doesn't think that Trump is unfit to be president, sort of talking about this age question, that he doesn't think anybody over the age of 80 should be president. I mean, let's talk about the dynamics here, right? Because these candidates for this whole campaign have been really towing that line between, well, you know, appealing to the anti-Trump wing of the party, but you can't alienate the Trump supporters too much. And then it gets back to the whole idea of that these guys are trying to take former President Trump out of the front runner. So I'm curious to know how you guys thought that DeSantis' answer here played, because, you know, Christie really pressed him strong and hard on this question of Trump, which has been looming over this entire primary season. Ameshia, we can go to you on that first.
Well, honestly, I was glad equity finally came into the conversation about age, because if the argument from Republicans is that Biden is too old, then on that same token, you have to look at the fact that Trump's right there behind him. But that's not the question that was asked by the moderator. And I was thankful that Chris Christie, though he's polling in, you know, the bare bottom of this, actually pushed Ron DeSantis to take a stand, because the moderator kind of just let him slide on that one for a little bit. We all know Donald Trump's age. Do you think he is fit for office? That's a very different question than the age question. And he skirted around it time and time again. And I think you're right in the sense that he doesn't want to offend Donald Trump's base, because that is also the base he's been trying to quill. He's been trying to be mini Trump the entire time while Trump hasn't been on that stage. He knows how to speak to that audience. And I don't think, with the exception of Chris Christie, and we did see a little bit of this from Nikki Haley tonight as well, no one had been going straight forward, full throttle against Donald Trump, who is at the leaderboard by 30 plus percentage points above all of them at this point. It was refreshing to see Chris Christie push back and finally try to get try to stick DeSantis down to saying something. Is he fit for office or is he not fit for office? You have to stand here and make that plain, because he's the leader of the Republican Party and he's the GOP frontrunner.
TW, I mean, the dynamics here are fascinating. You have these four individuals who are saying that they are a better choice than former President Trump to lead the party into the 2024 election. But then you have Ron DeSantis, who won't go as far to say he's not unfit for office, because, again, you have to appeal to these two wings of the party. How do you think these candidates navigated this very fine line? And do you think any of it was effective in terms of clinching this nomination?
Yeah, look, first of all, I loved the idea of playing Trump's words and clips in multiple questions in a segment. I thought that was great. I don't think that was used appropriately in previous debates. Secondly, I loved seeing two smart lawyers go at it. And Christie, a former prosecutor and a damn good one, stick it to the candidates and force them on issues in a way that moderators can't. But there's an artful way of answering that question, right? Put your love or dislove of Trump aside, right? He might be more mentally equipped to be president at this moment than you think President Biden might be, fair or foul. But you can say, yeah, sure, day one in office, I think he might be good. But I don't know what year 4 looks like, and I'm not willing to take that bet. That doesn't mean he's not mentally fit to be president. That means I don't want to take a gamble of what a President Trump in 4 years looks like. That is the answer. So I think there was a better way to do that. I don't know if he got nervous or if he just didn't want to do it. But look, this is a math issue. In Iowa, there is not one campaign who thinks that the state of Iowa is out of reach or at least a strong second place. And the number you need to look at is the people who are married to voting for Donald Trump in both Iowa and New Hampshire, especially Iowa, 40 days away. Now, there is a lot of that chunk that is open to hearing other ideas. And there are 2/3 of voters by some polls, Republican voters, that haven't even made up their minds yet. So to openly alienate and openly chop people, many of these campaigns have made the calculus that doing so to Trump is bad politics, is bad math. Now, again, I think there was an artful way of doing that. I don't particularly think Ron DeSantis threaded the needle, but there were more contrasts drawn with Trump. I think Nikki Haley did a great job drawing a contrast on China and on the debt, and I think she tried to find that avenue, and I think everyone should follow suit on that.
All right, Ameshia, TW, we'll be right back. I want to head now back into the spin room at the University of Alabama, where the Hill's Julia Manchester is there, live in Tuscaloosa. Julia, what is the energy like right there in that debate hall? What's the energy like in the spin room? What are folks saying all around you?
Hey, Mychael, the energy is certainly very high right now, definitely with everyone filing in here. But I want to bring in a guest. We have Ron DeSantis Communications Director, Andrew Romeo. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Julia. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so the first question is, how did it go tonight for the governor?
I thought it was an excellent night for Ron DeSantis, another debate victory. The reality is he showed he's the only one that can fight, win, and lead for the Republican Party. He showed he's the most conservative candidate on stage. While Nikki Haley was no-show Nikki tonight, she proceeded to be in the background the whole night, and when she did come out into the debate, she had no answers for the hits on her record. Ron DeSantis proved why he is a much better conservative candidate and why he is going to be the best candidate to take Donald Trump on for this nomination tonight.
There was certainly a lot of noise on the debate stage, particularly between Haley and Ramaswamy, Christie getting in there, but we saw that the governor was able to have a few standout moments. Do you think this was probably his most notable or best debate so far?
I think he's had great debates every step of the way, and I think that this one was no exception. I think what really stood out tonight was Ron DeSantis being able to make the case that he is the true conservative on the stage, whereas others like Nikki Haley spend their time caving to the left. They cave to their liberal donors, they cave to China, they don't support girls from having separate bathrooms from boys. That was a big contrast in this debate with her and DeSantis, and I think he drove that point home. That was probably the most memorable moment of the debate, and I think a key one for viewers to understand.
So going forward, obviously you guys have prioritized Iowa, but and I know you get this question a lot. Donald Trump is still leading in the polls by double digits. How do you close that gap with roughly 6 weeks, and how do you go from Iowa, a very different state, to New Hampshire?
Sure, you do it by putting in the work, and that's what the governor is doing. He just completed his 99-county tour, the full Grassley, the only candidate in the race to do it. That means he's reaching out. He's meeting with Iowans every day. He's got a number of big key endorsements. He has 42 state legislative endorsements. No one else is close. That's the type of grassroots support you need to win an Iowa caucus. So everything that you need to do to win in Iowa, he is doing it. He is doing the formula that you need. And then the momentum that we would have coming out of Iowa is going to be key in New Hampshire as well. So we're excited about New Hampshire. That's why the governor continues to spend time there and campaign in New Hampshire as well.
Andrew Romeo, thank you so much, and best of luck on the trail.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Mychael, I'll send it back to you now.
Thanks so much, Julia. Thanks. All right. We are now going to go next to a conversation with Decision Desk HQ about some of the numbers in this current Republican primary presidential debate. I'm going to throw it to Kevin Cirilli for that conversation.
I want to dive into the Decision Desk 2024 crosstabs because specifically when you look at Republicans, former President Donald Trump, 60% of Republican voters are backing former President Trump to be the standard bearer in 2024. This is a race for second place. 11% for Ron DeSantis, 10% for Nikki Haley. So all of these other candidates, Christie, Vivek Ramaswamy, when they get out of the race or if they hang on, how do they impact the race for second place? President Biden, his approval numbers, he's got a 42% approval rating amongst all Americans. Just 16% of Americans strongly approve of the job he's doing. But dig deeper into the crosstabs, and you get 74% of Republican voters who strongly disapprove of the job that President Biden is doing. And only 45% of his own party approves of the way that President Biden is conducting his time in office. Specifically with independents, President Biden has a problem amongst independent voters. Think Maricopa County, Swing County, and Arizona. 35% of independent voters strongly disapprove of the job that President Biden is doing. And let's take a look now at the economy, specifically as it relates to what's going on with inflation and crime and all of the border. And when you look specifically at inflation, it's all about inflation. 54% of Democrats concerned about inflation. 47% of Republicans concerned about inflation. 55% of independents, inflation. Inflation. It's something that the administration has to grapple with. But Trump's numbers have traditionally been higher. Global conflict, it's what everybody in Congress is talking about. And what is the biggest threat facing the United States? It's China. 43% of all voters rank China as the top priority of the threat facing the United States. That's more than Russia, North Korea, and Iran combined. And when you look at it by party breakdown, 56% of Republicans say that China is the biggest threat. 40% say China for independent voters. But look at this. 33% of Democrats listed Russia. 32% of Democrats West said China. So Democrats are a bit divided in terms of whether China or Russia is the biggest threat. It's impacting the conversation. So that's what's happening with global conflict. But when you look specifically at one of the hot button issues, TikTok, and whether or not it should be banned, take a look at this. It's a generational divide. 30% of Americans aged 18 to 34 strongly oppose a ban to TikTok. But the older that they get, 25% of voters ages 35 to 55, regardless of party, somewhat support a ban of TikTok. And baby boomers ages 55 and up strongly support, 35% margin, a ban on TikTok. A fascinating look when you look at these decision desk crosstabs, just to see how that is impacting not just what the candidates are saying on that debate stage, but also what voters are thinking about throughout the country.
All right, Kevin Cirilli, thanks so much. Let's head back now to the spin room at the University of Alabama, where Julia Manchester with The Hill is there with Congressman Ralph Norman, a Republican from South Carolina who's a backer of Nikki Haley for the presidential primary. Julia, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Congressman Norman, what a night. Just in general, the first question I want to ask, and thank you for joining us, but Nikki Haley continued to get those personal attacks from Vivek Ramaswamy. Was this something you were expecting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the reason they're doing that, it wasn't just Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, Christie to some extent, but no, she's been going up in the polls. Where was the criticism when she just got started, when no one took her seriously? So it doesn't surprise me. Nikki handled it well. It shows why she's going up. People like her message. They like how she delivers it. They like the vision she has for the country. The attacks is only going to increase.
Do you think she handled that criticism well? And do you think, in a way, that criticism elevates her?
What criticism does to Nikki Haley is makes her feistier. It makes her more willing to engage. And this will continue, and she knows it. Now, if she was going down in the polls, no one would say anything, but it's expected. Now, it was unexpected with Ramaswamy, with calling, had the sign, she's a corrupt, questioning her Christianity, bringing her daughter into it in the last debate. That's below the belt, but he runs his own campaign, and he'll have to answer for it. The voters saw the real Nikki Haley, and I think it was very positive, and it'll show in the polls.
So going forward, she's certainly getting momentum in the polls. She's getting momentum with these endorsements like the Koch network. But going forward, she's still, even if she knocks DeSantis out of that second place in every poll, she's still going to be second to Donald Trump by double digits. How does she close that gap?
Here's what's happening, I think, and polls change. As we've seen with candidates over the years, Jeb Bush comes to mind. He was up in the polls, then all of a sudden he just it didn't play out for him right. I think what's changed, people are now scared. They see what the Biden administration has done to completely destroy this country, and they want a candidate that's got the right vision and can win, can bring moderates, independents, people to go to the polls.
They build good commercial airplanes. They build airplanes for our Air Force. I am proud of them. They employ a lot of people in South Carolina.
That's what's changed. I think the poll numbers will change as those get out. And I would assume at some point, as Tim Scott got out and others, if Nikki keeps going out, DeSantis is going to have to get out. I think she will stand a good chance of getting his supporters. And I think the polls will change, and I think she'll be the next president.
Congressman, while I have you, and final question, big day on Capitol Hill, former Speaker Kevin McCarthy announcing that he will retire at the end of this month. What does this mean for your conference and the party going forward?
Well, we got a slim majority, as you know, 3 votes, and it just narrows it when they kicked George DeSantis out, which I think was a mistake. But that being said, it just, we've got to keep our momentum. We got to keep. I don't care if the majority is 1. We still got the gavel. And I hate Kevin got out when he did. I hate Bill Johnson is getting out in January to be president of a university. But it is what it is. People make their own decisions. But we've got to keep the momentum, and the Republicans have got to get together and move forward and fight an administration that's destroying the country.
Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Mychael, that's a rare instance of our world crisscrossing Capitol Hill and the presidential campaign trail, but I'm going to send this back to you. What an exciting night to be in politics.
Yeah, Julia, a bit of a crossover episode right there. But if you have a few minutes, I want to ask you a little bit more about the energy in that room. You're hearing from these surrogates. What are folks saying who won in that room from tonight's debate?
Well, one notable name that's being floated, I think, in this room and online in terms of who performed well is Ron DeSantis. You know, as someone who's watched and covered the majority of these debates so far, I wouldn't say that Ron DeSantis has ever performed poorly, but he has struggled to have a breakout moment like we've seen from Nikki Haley, for example. Tonight, I think, was certainly his night. He was able to break through that noise with the back and forth between Haley and Ramaswamy. And then, of course, you had him talking about policy. We know that Ron DeSantis at his core is a policy wonk. And I think that really shined through. And we heard from his communications director earlier in the program. He talked about how, they say he is the most conservative candidate on that stage. But the problem is, and, I've asked this of the Haley campaign and of the DeSantis campaign, how do they close that gap with Donald Trump? I mean, we are roughly 6 weeks away from the Iowa caucuses. And he's leading them by double digits. So it's hard to see how that gap closes, but I'm curious to see if tonight's debate changed anyone's mind ultimately.
Yeah, and Julia, I've got one more for you. This debate has been billed as sort of a make or break moment for these candidates, being that it's the fourth debate, the final debate before the primary season. Iowa just 40 days away, and then we sort of have that domino effect of more elections right thereafter. I mean, do you think that any of these candidates, we can start with Ron DeSantis, made enough of a dent in former President Trump's lead, had a good enough performance that they can maybe inch closer to him? Or was this really just, again, a fight for second place?
Yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out in the polls, and I'm sure we'll be in touch with our decision desk partners in the near future. But look, for now, I'm going to be curious about donor reaction. Look, we saw donors, going back to the first debate in Milwaukee and the subsequent debates, really start to take towards Nikki Haley because she was able to come across as the adult in the room. She was clean, polished on stage. But I think tonight might be a good night for DeSantis, and I'm curious to see whether donors are, sort of raising their eyebrows and taking a second look. And he's the candidate, I would argue, that mostly needs it. I saw so much commentary out there during the debate from colleagues and fellow journalists that essentially said this was the debate Ron DeSantis needed back in August. This was a performance he should have had way earlier this year. But, perhaps it isn't too late. I think with these debates, it's hard to tell whether they change voter sentiment. It seems like the primary electorate looking at polls are pretty set in their ways, the majority of them supporting Donald Trump. But you also have the donors that have slowly, inched towards Nikki Haley in this. We know that donors have money and resources, and that translates into getting the message out there. So that's what we'll be watching for. But I think we can probably see the dividends of that potentially paying out in the next week or so.
All right, Julia Manchester, live from the debate spin room in Alabama. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, I want to bring back in my panel now Ameshia Cross and T.W. Arrighi. We just heard from Julia. We heard from Congressman Norman. We heard from the communications director for Ron DeSantis. We're hearing all the spin, but I want to go back to one moment from the debate tonight. And it was a conversation about social media. This was sort of a buzzy moment from the debate tonight. We'll play the clip and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
I'll say this. What I said was that social media companies need to show us their algorithms. I also said there are millions of bots on social media right now. They're foreign, they're Chinese, they're Iranian. I will always fight for freedom of speech for Americans. We do not need freedom of speech for Russians and Iranians and Hamas. We need social media companies to go and fight back on all of these bots that are happening. That's what I said. As a mom, do I think that social media would be more civil if we went and had people's names next to that? Yes, I do think that, because I think we've got too much cyberbullying. I think we've got child pornography and all of those things. But having said that, I never said government should go and require anyone's name.
That's false.
She said, I want your name.
She
As President of the
absolutely said
United
it.
States, her first day in office, she said, one of the first things I'm going to do,
I said
all
we were going to
social
get
media
the
is, I
millions
want
of
your name.
bots.
She wants
That's what she
government
said.
ID to dox every American.
That's what she said. You can roll the tape.
So to get into a little bit of a policy conversation now, I mean, we're seeing this robust debate about social media, about technology. Is this going to be a salient issue with voters? We also saw Nikki Haley once again call for a ban of TikTok. I specifically want to zero in on some of these young voters who have become such an important voting bloc. When we talked about the 2022 midterm elections, we look forward to the 2024 elections. Is this kind of messaging effective, especially for the younger voters? TW, we can go to you first.
Yes. For some, to some. And I say that because I was communications director for Lindsey Graham's reelection in 2020. And a big issue in the latter months of that election was the banning of TikTok. Donald Trump was talking a lot about it. Lindsey Graham brokered a deal that stopped that from happening. The problems still remain with data security and TikTok and the Chinese interfering. There's dissent on our side with folks like Rand Paul who think that's even going too far. But the issue brought up today in today's debate, I think if you could give Nikki Haley a truth serum, she wished she had that original answer back in which she said that everyone should somehow be identified or you'd have to register to have your name on social media. And I'm a big proponent of anonymity in press. The background on my phone is Ben Franklin, Richard Saunders, Silence Do Good. I am all about anonymity. I think it's part and parcel to our democracy and our free speech. And I think the Republican Party right now is grappling with how we deal with foreign adversaries who want to do us harm, like China and Iran and other bad actors, and how we deal with freedom of speech. And it's something we have dealt with our entire existence, from the dealings after our independence and how we dealt with the French Revolution and dissent among our populace to today. Nikki Haley, I bet, wishes she had that original sentence back, because I don't really think that's what she believes. But you just saw, by the way, to highlight her strength, you had two guys ganging up on her, feasting like rabid animals to try to take those points away from her that she has gotten. All I can say is when we get through Iowa and we get through New Hampshire, read the room. Everyone needs to read the room and get out, who isn't in second.
Ameshia, curious on your take. You know, when we can even broaden this to the entire electorate, bring in Democrats also, this conversation about social media censorship when you're looking at courting young voters, I mean, looking ahead to 2024, do you see this as a salient issue? And how do you think the candidates tonight did on messaging that?
I definitely see it as a salient issue. Of course, younger people don't want TikTok to disappear. It's where many people are taking rise to not only use their voice in advocacy, but also to essentially make money. And we're watching, on that same token, an infiltration from foreign governments like China, not only in terms of the spreading of anti-Semitism, which we've seen rise across things like TikTok, but also the spreading of disinformation. That is happening. And a lot of those young people are voicing these things as fact. And that is a real problem. But the other thing is the data mining. Both Republicans and Democrats, not only at the federal level, but also at the state level, have tried to ensure that there are some limits to the level of access, specifically to foreign governments, that is happening across TikTok, but also the protection of our young people. We can't talk about mental health and mental health crises in America today without talking about the influence of social media, particularly on our middle school and teenage boys and girls. I think that that's a conversation that we're going to be having for quite some time. Does that mean that we need to eradicate the platform? Probably not. But I do think that there needs to be some guardrails, and we have to be a lot more. We have to be a lot more forthright about what those are and how soon they need to happen.
I know we spoke about former President Trump before, but his PAC is out with a statement tonight following tonight's debate. He was at a private fundraiser in Florida, but this is what his group just put out. I'll read it in part. Quote, "The battle for second place has become the biggest waste of time, money, and energy that politics has ever seen." Now, the person who's in first place for that battle for second place, Ron DeSantis, who has been a close ally of former President Trump, it was noted that the endorsement of Trump to get the governorship really helped propel him to that position. DeSantis had some choice words for Trump tonight. I want to play that clip. We'll talk about it on the other side.
He did say in 2016 he'd have the largest deportation program in history. He deported less than Barack Obama did when Barack Obama was president. So some of these policies he ran on in 2016, I was cheering him on then, but he didn't deliver it. Here's what I can promise people. 100% of the things I promised as governor, I delivered on those promises. I beat the left time and time again, and that's what I'll do for you as president.
Now, I want to juxtapose that with what Vivek Ramaswamy said, and I'm going to read some of those statements in part. He said the January 6th was an inside job. The Great Replacement Theory is part of a Democratic platform. The 2020 election was stolen by big tech, and the 2016 election was stolen by the national security establishment. I'm curious what you take as Vivek Ramaswamy's strategy here at large in terms of not taking the bait to go against former President Trump, but even, backing some of these claims that Trump has made over the years, specifically with 2016 and 2020, when you talk about the election. TW, we'll go to you first. What did you make of this strategy from Vivek Ramaswamy? Of course, not very different from what we've seen in previous debates, but is he making a play here for a potential VP pick? I mean, what do you make of this?
Maybe. He's trying to be a more youthful and intellectual continuation of Trump policy. He sees that as his land to the future. And like I said, I think he has a bright and long future in the party. The problem with Vivek Ramaswamy is he is grasping, I think, he's overextending himself to trying to create these viral moments by saying incendiary things that sometimes feel, and I think to those on stage felt like he just came up with a week ago. And it sounds sometimes inauthentic, and I think that was come up. Now, he might come back and say, no, I've had these opinions forever. And OK, so be it. I think the strategy is tough. But at this stage of the ball game, he doesn't have a lot to lose with the people he is trying to appeal to, namely the Trump base. He has taken the gamble that this new populism that Trump has created is not going anywhere, and he wants to have a voice in it in the years moving forward. The problem is his mechanism for continuing his lane through that base is one that uses Trumpian sayings and forceful nature, which I don't think often fits his personality and what people see of him.
Ameshia, when I go to you now, I want to talk about another policy question. We saw a lot of foreign policy discussion tonight, and the candidates spar over their thoughts on Ukraine, their thoughts on the Israel-Hamas war. I mean, I think that this primary season has been very unique in that we've seen a large focus on foreign policy, probably because there are two wars going on. Two of our closest allies are involved with wars, of course, Israel and Ukraine. Curious to know what you think of these foreign policy differences. Do you think that these will resonate among voters? Typically, we don't see foreign policy being a real issue that makes the difference for voters when they get to the ballot box. But this year in particular, and seeing that these debates have focused so largely on foreign policy, do you see them as being, maybe a game changer in some of the eyes of some voters?
No. What I do think is going to be a game changer is the budgetary constraints that are surrounding them. What is on most voters' mind is kitchen table issues. And when we are not actively engaged in a war, i.e. our troops, American troops, are not on the ground in foreign wars, domestic policy and those who vote along those lines and prioritize that first and foremost do not change. What we are seeing is that whether you're on the left or the right or in the middle, Americans largely do not want to see more and more money go to these wars, particularly when many of them are having a hard time paying their rent, seeing rising housing costs, seeing food costs, having a really hard time trying to make sure that their kids are able to be in childcare and things like that. I think that what we're seeing here, and one of the reasons why the Biden administration itself is having a little bit of trouble, is because the messaging around the reasoning why to support Ukraine, as well as why to send money to Israel, it's falling on deaf ears for a lot of the American public. That is actually going to be the ones who are going to the polls next year. And I think that is the bigger issue here, not necessarily a foreign policy argument as much as it is we see what those budget line items are and multi-billions of dollars that many Americans feel should be utilized right here. I do think that there are some problems with that argument and the narrow view of it, but that is where the American public is right now.
TW, a lot of talk about foreign policy in these debates. Do you think they're going to make a difference at the end of the day?
No, because I think they reflect more or less where the party is and where the parties that be in power are, namely the House. I think you saw tremendous support for Israel with the perhaps conditional exception of Vivek. I think he supports Israel. I just think the money side's a little iffy. But I think Ukraine's going to be a tough one. And I think that's why you've seen it on Capitol Hill now attached to border security. And I actually don't see a problem with that. But you've seen figures like Lindsey Graham my former boss, be very outspoken about the need to conjoin those two. I think, though, the Republican Party is united in support of Israel, in opposing China, and defending America's interests abroad. We might have different ways. Some people on stage might have different ways of getting there, but I think at least 3 of the 4 broadly in agreement on protecting America's interests abroad. Ukraine, obviously, being maybe the one exception with Nikki and Christie and the others. But I think broadly speaking, the Republican Party is united in the big priorities facing American foreign policy.
All right, we're going to have to end the conversation there. A lot more topics to discuss, but we're out of time. Ameshia Cross, T.W. Arrighi, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for this live coverage of the 4th Republican debate. And now, before we go, I want to go back to Julia Manchester, reporter with The Hill. She's in Alabama in the debate spin room. Julia, tell us the latest. What are you hearing?
So in terms of what I'm hearing, we're definitely hearing, praise for Ron DeSantis tonight. And I think Vivek Ramaswamy getting a few negative headlines. Vivek had a number of very interesting comments during the debate, accusing Nikki Haley of not being able to differentiate between Israel and the U.S. on a map. And then, of course, later on, talking about those conspiracies, those unproven conspiracy theories that January 6th was an inside job. So certainly making those headlines. But we know that Vivek is somewhere over there. We were trying to get him before, but this is the spin room that you're seeing here. It's starting to quiet down, maybe a little bit, but we'll wait for some of the more other candidates.
All right. The Hill's Julia Manchester live in the Alabama spin room. Julia, thank you so much. And that's going to do it tonight for our post-debate coverage. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And check out thehill.com for all your news updates on politics and policy. I'll see you back here soon at the intersection of politics and policy.